Welcome back to Her True Stories, where we serve up the most incredible tales of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate triumph that will leave you speechless. If you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because today's story is absolutely explosive. We're talking about a 66-year-old mother who is called bad luck and thrown out by her own son, only to build a $1 million empire and deliver the most devastating rejection you've ever heard. This is Emma's story, and honey, when you hear what she said to her son when he came crawling back, you're going to need tissues. Buckle up, this revenge is served ice cold. My name is Emma Johnson, and at 66 years old, I thought I'd raised a son I could be proud of. For 34 years, I believed that Marcus was everything a mother could want: successful, ambitious, driven. I thought the sacrifices I'd made, the dreams I'd deferred, the life I'd built around his needs had all been worth it. I was wrong about everything. Let me take you back to the beginning to show you exactly how wrong I was about the son I'd given everything to create. Marcus came into this world fighting. Born 3 weeks early after a difficult pregnancy that nearly killed me, he spent his first month in the NICU while I sat by his incubator for 18 hours a day, willing him to survive. His father, my ex-husband Robert, couldn't handle the stress and left when Marcus was 6 months old. "I didn't sign up for this," Robert said as he packed his bags. "A sick kid, medical bills, a wife who's always at the hospital. This isn't the life I wanted." So there I was, 27 years old, alone, with a baby who needed constant medical attention and no income except the minimum wage job I'd taken at a local diner. But I didn't give up. I worked double shifts, slept when Marcus slept, and somehow managed to pay for his medications, his doctor visits, his everything. When Marcus was 2 and finally healthy, I made a decision that would shape the next 20 years of my life. Everything I did would be for him. Every choice, every sacrifice, every dream I put on hold, it was all to give my son the life I'd never had. I worked at that diner for 15 years, saving every penny I could for Marcus's future. While other women my age were dating, traveling, pursuing careers, I was home helping with homework, driving to soccer practice, and working weekends to pay for the things Marcus needed to succeed. "Mom, can I take piano lessons? All the smart kids take piano." "Of course, sweetheart," even though it meant eating ramen for a month. "Mom, I need a new laptop for school. Mine is too slow." "We'll figure it out, baby," even though it meant working Christmas Day to afford it. "Mom, I want to go to Princeton. It's the best school for business." "Then that's where you'll go." Even though it meant taking out loans that would take me 15 years to pay off. Every time Marcus needed something, I found a way to provide it. Every time he had a dream, I made it possible. Every time he faced a challenge, I was there to help him overcome it. Marcus graduated from Princeton with a business degree and immediately landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm in the city. I was so proud I could barely contain myself. At his graduation, wearing the best dress I could afford, which wasn't much, I watched my son walk across that stage and felt like all the sacrifices had been worth it. "I did it, Mom," he said, hugging me after the ceremony. "I really did it." "No, baby," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "We did it. We did it together." But somewhere along the way, Marcus forgot about the we. As his career took off and his salary grew, he started visiting less. Phone calls became shorter. The gratitude I'd once seen in his eyes was replaced by something else: embarrassment. He moved into a luxury apartment in Manhattan, bought expensive clothes, and started dating women who worked in finance and law. When he brought them home to meet me, I could see the judgment in their eyes as they looked around my modest 2-bedroom house with its second-hand furniture and outdated kitchen. "Mom still lives in the same place she's had since I was a kid," Marcus would say. as if my inability to upgrade was some kind of personal failing rather than the result of spending everything on his future. The visits became even less frequent. The phone calls stopped altogether unless he needed something. Mother's Day became a text message. Christmas became a perfunctory visit where he'd stay for exactly 2 hours before making excuses about work or prior commitments. Then Marcus got married. Stephanie was everything I wasn't: young, beautiful, educated, and from money. She worked as an investment banker and made more in a year than I'd made in 5. She was also cold, calculating, and made no effort to hide her disdain for me. "It's so quaint," she said the first time Marcus brought her to my house, looking around like she was visiting a museum of poverty. Very authentic. I wasn't invited to help plan the wedding. I found out about the engagement through a Facebook post. When I asked Marcus about it, he said they wanted to keep things simple and intimate. The wedding was anything but simple. Held at an exclusive country club, it cost more than I'd made in 2 years. I was seated at a table in the back with distant relatives I'd never met, wearing a dress I'd bought at Walmart because it was all I could afford. During his wedding speech, Marcus thanked everyone who'd helped him become the man he was today. He thanked his college professors, his mentors, his friends, and his new in-laws. He never mentioned me. Not once. I sat there in my cheap dress, watching my son celebrate the life I'd made possible, and felt something I'd never felt before: the bitter sting of being forgotten by the person I'd given everything to create. After the wedding, Marcus and Stephanie bought a house in Westchester, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. They sent me photos but never invited me to visit. When I suggested coming to see their new home, Stephanie would always have some excuse about why it wasn't a good time. "We're having work done on the guest room. The painters are coming this week. We're hosting Stephanie's parents, and you know how full the house gets." The message was clear. I wasn't welcome in their new life. Then Marcus got his promotion. Senior consultant at 32, pulling in a 6-figure salary plus bonuses. He called me for the first time in months to share the news. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, genuinely happy for him despite everything. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without all the sacrifices you made." For a moment, I thought maybe he did remember. Maybe he did understand what I'd given up for him. I was wrong again. The call lasted exactly 3 minutes. After that, I didn't hear from him for another 4 months. But then everything changed. The company Marcus worked for was acquired by a larger firm, and in the restructuring, his position was eliminated. After 8 years of climbing the corporate ladder, Marcus Johnson, Princeton graduate, rising star, golden boy, was unemployed. That's when I got the call that would change everything between us forever. "Mom?" His voice was different, shaky, desperate, nothing like the confident son who'd been too busy for me for years. "Marcus. How are you, sweetheart? I haven't heard from you in so long." I'm not good, Mom. I need to talk to you." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "What's wrong?" "I lost my job. The whole department got laid off. They gave me a severance package, but with the mortgage and Stephanie's spending—" "Mom, I don't know what I'm going to do." My maternal instincts kicked in immediately, the way they always did when Marcus was in trouble. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But you're smart and talented. You'll find something else. Maybe this is a chance for a fresh start, to find something you really love." "You don't understand," he interrupted. "The job market is terrible. I've been looking for 3 months, and I can't even get an interview. Our savings are almost gone. We might lose the house." "Marcus, take a breath. We'll figure this out. Maybe you could."
"No, Mom."
"You need to stop talking." The harshness in his voice stunned me into silence. "This is all your fault," he continued, his voice getting louder. "Ever since you came back into my life more, everything's been falling apart." First, I got passed over for that promotion last year, right after you visited the office. Then Stephanie's pregnancy ended in miscarriage the week after you stayed with us. Now I lost my job right after we had dinner for your birthday. I couldn't breathe. Marcus, what are you saying? I'm saying you're bad luck, Mom. You're like a curse. Every time something good is happening in my life, you show up and ruin it. The words hit me like physical blows. Sweetheart, you can't possibly believe. I do believe it. You're toxic. You're negative. You bring this cloud of failure wherever you go. Marcus, please.
No.
I'm done pretending that having you around doesn't affect my life. Stephanie's been saying it for years, and I should have listened to her. Stephanie. Of course. What has Stephanie been saying? That you're holding me back. That you represent everything I'm trying to move away from, the poverty, the struggle, the small-town thinking. She says successful people don't keep looking backward, and having you around keeps me tied to a past I need to leave behind. Each word was a knife to my heart. The son I'd sacrificed everything for was telling me that I was the problem with his life. Marcus, I've never asked you for anything. I've only tried to support you. Your support is suffocating. You think I don't know that you expect me to take care of you now? You think I don't see how you look at our house, our life, like you deserve a piece of it? I have never expected anything from you. Really? Then why do you keep hanging around? Why do you keep inserting yourself into our lives? Why can't you just disappear? The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence.
Disappear.
You want me to disappear? I whispered.
Yes.
I want you to leave us alone. I want you to stop calling, stop visiting, stop expecting us to include you in our lives. I want you to understand that we don't need you anymore. The cruelty in his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. This wasn't my son talking. This was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. I see, I said quietly.
Do you?
Because I don't think you do. I think you still believe that I owe you something because you raised me. But you know what, Mom? You didn't do me any favors. You kept me trapped in your small, limited world for years. You made me think that struggle was noble, that poverty was character building. Well, it's not. It's just poverty. I gave you everything I had. You gave me your hang-ups, your fear, your small-town mentality. Do you know how hard it's been to overcome the damage you did to me? How much therapy I've needed to stop thinking like a poor person? Therapy. My son had been in therapy to get over having me as a mother. Marcus, I love you. Your love is selfish. It's needy. It's everything I don't want in my life. What do you want me to do? I want you to stay away from us. I want you to stop acting like you're part of our family. I want you to accept that your job as my mother is over, and you failed at preparing me for the real world.
Failed.
After 34 years of sacrifice, I had failed. And if I don't, then I'll get a restraining order. I'll tell everyone that you're harassing us, that you're an unstable old woman who can't accept that her son has moved on. Is that what you want? The threat was clear. Comply, or be publicly humiliated. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's not what I want.
Good.
Then we understand each other. We understand each other. I don't want to see you, hear from you, or have any contact with you until I figure out how to fix the mess my life has become. And when I do fix it, don't expect an invitation back in. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. My son, the child I'd carried for 9 months, the baby I'd nursed through illness, the boy I'd worked 3 jobs to support, the young man I'd put through college, had just told me I was bad luck and ordered me to disappear from his life. At 66 years old, I'd been abandoned by the only person I'd ever truly loved. But as I sat there in my quiet house, something unexpected happened. Instead of falling apart, instead of collapsing into grief and self-pity, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. For 34 years, I'd been Emma Johnson, Marcus's mother. I defined myself entirely through my relationship to him. Every decision I made was filtered through the question, what's best for Marcus? But Marcus had just fired me from that job. He'd told me, in the cruelest possible terms, that my services as his mother were no longer required. Fine. If Marcus wanted me to disappear, I'd disappear. But not in the way he expected. I was about to discover who Emma Johnson was when she wasn't bending her entire existence around an ungrateful son. And when I figured that out, Marcus was going to learn what happens when you throw away the best thing in your life. He thought I was bad luck. He had no idea what bad luck actually looked like. But he was about to find out. The first week after Marcus's call was the hardest. I wandered around my house like a ghost, picking up objects that reminded me of him. The Little League trophy I'd kept on the mantel, the Mother's Day cards he'd made in elementary school, the photo from his high school graduation where we were both smiling like we'd conquered the world together. I'd built my entire identity around being his mother. Without that role, I felt like I was disappearing just as he demanded. But on day 8, something shifted. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at the wall, when my neighbor Dorothy knocked on my door. "Emma, honey, you look like hell," she said in her typical blunt way. Dorothy was 72, widowed, and had never minced words. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The phone call, the accusations, the demand that I disappear. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her face getting redder with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That boy needs his ass kicked," she finally said. "Dorothy." "No, I'm serious. You spent your whole life raising that child, and this is how he repays you? By blaming you for his problems and throwing you away like garbage. He's just stressed about losing his job." "Stressed?" "Emma, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for him even after he treated you like dirt." Dorothy was right. Even after everything Marcus had said, I was still trying to justify his behavior, still trying to be the understanding mother who absorbed his pain without complaint. "You know what your problem is?" Dorothy continued. "You've spent so long being Marcus's mother that you forgot you're also Emma Johnson. You had a life before that boy, and you can have a life after him. I don't know how to have a life that isn't about him." "Then it's time to learn." Dorothy stayed for 3 hours that day, making lists of things I could do, places I could go, dreams I could pursue. It was the first time in decades that I'd thought about what I wanted rather than what Marcus needed. "What did you want to do before you had Marcus?" Dorothy asked. I had to think hard to remember. I wanted to start my own business. I had ideas about. Well, it sounds silly now. "What ideas?" "I wanted to start a catering company. I was always good at cooking, and I had ideas about how to do events differently, more personally, than the big companies." "That doesn't sound silly at all. Why didn't you do it?" "Because Marcus was born, and then there was never time or money for my dreams. Everything went to his needs." "Well, Marcus doesn't need you anymore. So what's stopping you now?" What was stopping me? I was 66, not 96. I was healthy, experienced, and for the first time in 34 years, I had no one's needs to consider but my own. I wouldn't even know where to start. The same place everyone starts, with an idea and the courage to try. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dreamed about my own future instead of Marcus's. Over the next few weeks, I started researching catering businesses. I read books, watched videos, and talked to local business owners. I discovered that my severance package from the diner, where I'd finally been laid off after 20 years when they downsized, combined with my modest savings, might actually be enough to start something small. More importantly, I discovered that I wasn't the helpless, limited woman Marcus had described. I was organized, creative, hardworking, and had decades of experience dealing with difficult people under pressure. all skills that translated perfectly to running a business. I started small, very small. Dorothy hired me to cater her book club meeting, 12 ladies, simple lunch, $50. It went so well that 2 of the ladies hired me for their own events. Word spread slowly through their social circles. Emma's Elegant Occasions, I called my little business. I designed business cards at the local print shop and started building a client list one event at a time. The work was hard but exhilarating. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that was mine. Not for Marcus, not to spite Marcus, but completely independent of Marcus. I catered birthday parties, anniversary celebrations, small wedding receptions, and corporate lunch meetings. Each event taught me something new about the business, about myself, about what I was capable of when I wasn't limiting myself to what Marcus needed me to be. 6 months after Marcus had called me bad luck and demanded I disappear, I was bringing in enough money to pay my bills and even save a little. More importantly, I was happy. Genuinely, authentically happy in a way I hadn't been since Marcus was a small child who still needed his mother. I hadn't heard from him once during those 6 months. No calls to check on me, no texts to see how I was doing, no acknowledgement that I existed. According to Marcus, I had disappeared just as he'd demanded. But I hadn't disappeared. I'd been reborn. The business grew faster than I'd expected. My reputation for quality food, creative presentation, and personal attention spread throughout the community. I had to hire an assistant, then 2 assistants. I upgraded my equipment, expanded my menu options, and started taking on larger events. By the end of my first year, Emma's Elegant Occasions was booked solid for the next 3 months. I was making more money than I'd ever made at the diner, and I was building something that could actually become significant. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to expand beyond catering into event planning and venue management. I'd found a property, an old mansion that had been converted into a wedding venue but had fallen into disrepair. The owner was desperate to sell. I spent weeks analyzing the numbers, consulting with contractors, and developing a business plan. The property would need significant renovation, but the location was perfect and the potential was enormous. With the right investment, it could become the premier event destination in the region. There was only one problem. I needed more capital than I had. I went to 3 banks. All 3 turned me down. Mrs. Johnson, while your catering business shows promise, you lack the collateral and credit history for a loan this size, the loan officer at the 3rd bank explained. Perhaps you should consider a smaller expansion or finding a business partner with more resources. I walked out of that bank feeling frustrated but not defeated. There had to be another way. That evening, Dorothy came over with wine and encouragement. Those bankers don't know what they're missing, she said. You've built something amazing in just over a year. It's not enough. The property I want needs major work, and I can't get the financing. Have you considered investors? Who's going to invest in a 67-year-old woman with 1 year of business experience? Someone smart enough to see potential when they see it. Dorothy was right, but finding that someone seemed impossible. I was about to give up on the mansion when I got a call that changed everything. Mrs. Johnson? This is Patricia Williams from Williams Capital Management. I understand you're looking for investors for an event venue project. I had no idea who Patricia Williams was or how she'd heard about my business, but I agreed to meet with her. Patricia Williams turned out to be a sharp, successful woman in her 50s who owned an investment firm that specialized in women-owned businesses. She'd heard about my catering company through a client whose daughter's wedding I'd catered. Emma, may I call you Emma? I've been following your business for several months now. Your growth trajectory is impressive, your client satisfaction scores are off the charts, and your vision for this venue project is exactly the kind of thing my firm likes to support. You want to invest in my business? I want to offer you a partnership. Williams Capital will provide the renovation funding and business development expertise. You'll maintain majority ownership and complete creative control. In exchange, we'll take a percentage of profits and help you scale this into something much bigger. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A year ago, Marcus had called me bad luck and told me to disappear. Now, a successful businesswoman was offering to help me build an empire.
Why?
I asked. Why invest in me? Patricia smiled. Because you remind me of myself 20 years ago. A woman who'd been underestimated her whole life finally getting the chance to show what she's really capable of. Those are the best investments. We shook hands that day on a partnership that would transform Emma's Elegant Occasions from a small catering business into a full-service event management company with our own premier venue. The renovation of Rosewood Manor took 8 months. During that time, my catering business continued to grow, and I found myself managing projects, timelines, and budgets larger than anything I'd ever imagined. The grand opening of Rosewood Manor was everything I'd dreamed it could be. The local newspaper covered it, calling it a stunning transformation that brings elegance and sophistication to the local event scene. The mayor attended, along with business leaders, society wives, and everyone who was anyone in the community. I stood in the beautifully restored ballroom, watching guests mingle and admire what we created, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Pride in something that was entirely mine. Congratulations, Emma, Patricia said, raising a glass of champagne. You've built something remarkable here. We've built something remarkable. No, this vision was yours. I just provided the resources. The creativity, the passion, the determination, that was all you. As the evening wound down, I walked through the manor, checking on details and making sure everything was perfect. In the main hallway, I stopped in front of a mirror and looked at myself. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Confident, successful, accomplished. This wasn't the broken woman who'd been called bad luck and ordered to disappear. This was Emma Johnson, businesswoman, entrepreneur, someone who mattered. I'd proven that I wasn't bad luck. I'd proven that I wasn't limited or small-minded, or any of the other things Marcus had accused me of being. I'd built something beautiful and successful entirely on my own merit. The best part? I'd done it all without Marcus. He'd wanted me to disappear, so I'd disappeared from his life completely. But instead of fading away like he'd expected, I'd reinvented myself into someone he wouldn't even recognize. Someone he'd never been worthy of in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to get rid of the mother he found embarrassing, Marcus had freed me to become the woman I was always meant to be. He thought he was throwing away dead weight. Instead, he'd released a force of nature. And he had no idea what was coming for him. 2 years after Marcus had called me bad luck and demanded I disappear, Emma's Elegant Occasions had become the most sought-after event planning company in the tri-state area. Rosewood Manor was booked solid 18 months in advance, and I was planning events for celebrities, politicians, and business leaders who paid premium prices for what we offered. The success was intoxicating, but more than that, it was validating. Every 5-star review, every referral, every sold-out event was proof that Marcus had been wrong about me. I wasn't bad luck. I was a force of nature that had been held back for 34 years by his needs and expectations. Patricia and I had expanded beyond the original venue. We now owned 3 properties and managed events at dozens of others. I had a staff of 25, a fleet of catering trucks, and a reputation that extended far beyond our local community. The local business journal featured me on their cover with the headline, "The Woman Who Built an Empire from Scratch." The article detailed my journey from laid-off diner waitress to successful entrepreneur, though I was careful not to mention Marcus by name. I simply said that I'd found the courage to pursue my dreams after a significant personal loss had forced me to reevaluate my priorities. Emma Johnson represents the best of American entrepreneurship, the article quoted the mayor as saying. She saw an opportunity, took a risk, and built something that has created jobs and brought prestige to our community. But the achievement that meant the most to me was financial independence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about money. I could pay my bills without stress, save for the future, and even afford luxuries I'd never imagined having. I bought a new house, a beautiful four-bedroom colonial with a gourmet kitchen and a home office where I could work on business planning. It was 3 times the size of the modest house where I'd raised Marcus, and every inch of it was exactly what I wanted.
No compromises.
No sacrifices for someone else's needs. Just pure, selfish indulgence in creating a space that reflected who I'd become. The housewarming party was attended by 50 of my new friends, business associates, clients, neighbors who'd watched my transformation with admiration. Dorothy, now in her mid-70s but still sharp as a tack, gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. To Emma Johnson, who proved that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. And to the fool who let her go, may he someday realize what he lost. The crowd raised their glasses, and I felt a surge of triumph that was better than any drug. I hadn't heard from Marcus in over 2 years. Not a call, not a text, not even a birthday card. According to his demands, I had successfully disappeared from his life. But Marcus hadn't disappeared from mine. Not because I missed him, I didn't, but because I kept track of him the way a general keeps track of enemy movements. Social media made it easy. Marcus and Stephanie's Facebook and Instagram accounts told the story of their declining fortunes with each post. The luxury vacations had stopped. The expensive restaurants had been replaced by home-cooked meals. The designer clothes had given way to more practical options. Marcus was still unemployed 2 years after losing his job. His LinkedIn profile showed a series of short-term consulting gigs and exploring new opportunities, code for desperately seeking employment, but too proud to admit it. They'd sold the house in Westchester. The new place was a modest townhouse in a less prestigious neighborhood. Stephanie had gone back to work after a year of pursuing personal projects, code for "We're running out of money." The most telling detail was that Stephanie had started selling her designer handbags and jewelry on consignment websites. I knew because I created a fake profile to monitor their online activity. It was petty, but it was also satisfying to watch the woman who'd looked down on my quaint house now scrambling to sell her possessions to pay bills. But I didn't gloat.
I didn't reach out.
I didn't try to contact them in any way. I'd learned something valuable about revenge during my business success. The best revenge isn't direct confrontation. The best revenge is living so well that your enemy's failures become obvious by comparison. Marcus had called me bad luck and told me to disappear. I'd done exactly what he asked. I'd disappeared from his life completely. But while I was gone, I'd built something magnificent. He, meanwhile, was discovering what real bad luck looked like. The 3rd year brought even more success. Patricia and I opened a second location in the city, targeting the high-end corporate market. We were planning events for Fortune 500 companies, hosting product launches for major brands, and catering galas for nonprofit organizations with million-dollar budgets. I appeared on local television shows as a business expert, was invited to speak at women's entrepreneurship conferences, and was featured in several national magazines as an example of successful second-act careers. The money was substantial now. I was earning more in a month than I'd made in a year at the diner. I hired a financial advisor to help me manage my wealth and plan for a future that looked brighter than anything I'd ever imagined. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was personal. I discovered that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever believed. I was a natural leader, a creative problem solver, and a savvy businesswoman. All qualities that had been dormant while I was focused on being Marcus's mother. The woman I'd become would have intimidated the old Emma. This new version of myself was confident, successful, and completely self-sufficient. I didn't need anyone's approval, anyone's support, or anyone's validation. Especially not Marcus's. On the third anniversary of his call, I did something I'd never done before. I celebrated. Not his cruelty, but my liberation from it. I threw myself a party at Rosewood Manor, a beautiful evening event for 50 of my closest friends and business associates. 3 years ago, I told the crowd, I experienced the worst rejection of my life. Someone I loved told me I was bad luck and demanded that I disappear from their world. Tonight, I want to thank them for that rejection because it forced me to discover who I really am when I'm not limiting myself to who other people need me to be. The applause was thunderous. People came up afterward to share their own stories of rejection and reinvention. I realized that my story had become inspirational to others who'd been underestimated or dismissed. That night, as I cleaned up after the party, I found myself thinking about Marcus for the first time in months. Not with longing or sadness, but with something close to gratitude. He'd wanted me to disappear, and I had. But instead of vanishing into obscurity like he'd expected, I'd disappeared into success. I'd become invisible to him while becoming highly visible to everyone else. The boy who'd been embarrassed by his small town, working-class mother had no idea that she'd become one of the most successful businesswomen in the region. The son who'd blamed me for his failures had no clue that I was thriving beyond anything he'd ever achieved. And the best part? He was about to find out. Because success has a way of spreading news about itself. The bigger my business became, the more likely it was that word would reach him eventually. Whether through mutual acquaintances, news coverage, or simple coincidence, Marcus would eventually learn that the mother he discarded as bad luck had built an empire. When that day came, I wanted to be ready. I wanted him to understand exactly what he'd thrown away when he'd thrown me away. I wanted him to see that every accusation he'd made about me had been projection. He was the one who was limited, small-minded, and unlucky. Most of all, I wanted him to know that the woman he'd rejected had become someone far beyond his reach. Someone he'd never deserve again. The fourth year brought the opportunity I'd been unconsciously waiting for. A major corporation was looking for an event planning company to handle their annual shareholder meeting and gala, a prestigious, high-profile event that would be covered by business media and attended by industry leaders. The contract was worth more than my entire first year of revenue, but more importantly, it would establish Emma's Elegant Occasions as a major player in the corporate event world. There was one interesting detail about the company. They were based in Manhattan, with offices in the same building where Marcus had once worked. The same building where I'd visited him once, years ago, feeling proud and out of place as he'd shown me around his corporate domain. Small world, Patricia commented when we were preparing our proposal. Didn't you say your son used to work in that building? Former son, I corrected. And yes, he did. But that was a long time ago. Any chance you'll run into him? None at all. We don't move in the same circles anymore. That was true. Marcus's world had contracted to job searches and financial survival. Mine had expanded to include the highest levels of business and society. We won the contract. The shareholder meeting and gala were scheduled for a Thursday evening in October. The event would host 500 of the company's top executives, major shareholders, and business media. It was exactly the kind of high-profile success story I'd built my reputation on. As the date approached, I threw myself into the planning with the perfectionist attention to detail that had made my business successful. Every aspect of the event was planned to perfection, from the welcome cocktail reception to the 5-course dinner to the entertainment and networking opportunities. I would be on site personally to oversee the event, wearing a designer dress that cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment, and carrying myself with the confidence of someone who belonged in rooms full of powerful people. The woman who'd once felt intimidated visiting her son's office would now be commanding that same space as an equal to everyone in attendance. The irony was delicious. 2 weeks before the event, I was reviewing final details when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Emma, There's someone here to see you. He says he's your son. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After 3.5 years of complete silence, Marcus was standing in my office. Send him in, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my system. Marcus walked into my office, and I barely recognized him. The confident, successful man who'd called me bad luck was gone. In his place was someone who looked older, tired, and desperate. His clothes were off the rack, his hair needed cutting, and his eyes held the haunted look of someone who'd been struggling for too long. He stopped just inside the door, taking in my office with obvious shock. The mahogany desk, the awards on the walls, the view of our landscaped grounds visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't the modest life he'd expected to find me living. Hello, Marcus, I said, not getting up from my chair. This is unexpected, Mom. I mean, Emma. He seemed to be struggling with what to call me. I had no idea. I mean, I heard rumors, but I didn't believe. What can I do for you? Can we talk? Please. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. You have 5 minutes. He sat down heavily, and I could see him trying to process what he was seeing. The successful office, my professional appearance, the obvious signs of prosperity and achievement. I don't understand, he said finally. How did this happen? How did what happen? This. He gestured around the office. The business, the success, all of it. When did you? How did you? You told me to disappear, Marcus.
So I did.
This is what disappearing looked like for me. But you were just a waitress. You didn't know anything about business. Apparently, I knew more than you thought. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing the reality that his limited, small-town mother had built something he'd never been capable of achieving. I need to apologize, he said finally. For what? For everything. For the things I said, for cutting you out of my life, for being wrong about you. What makes you think you were wrong about me? This. He gestured around the office again. You've obviously done incredibly well for yourself. I was wrong to call you bad luck. I was wrong to blame you for my problems. Yes, you were. I was angry and scared about losing my job, and I took it out on you. I know that's not an excuse, but... You're right. It's not an excuse. Marcus looked uncomfortable, but he pressed on. I want to make things right between us. Do you?
Yes.
I want us to be a family again. Family. The word he'd rejected so completely 3.5 years ago. What's changed, Marcus? I've learned from my mistakes. I've grown as a person. I realize now how important family is. What else has changed? What do you mean? I mean, what's different about your life now that makes you want your mother back? He shifted uncomfortably. I've had time to think about things, to put them in perspective. Marcus, let me ask you directly. Are you here because you've genuinely realized you were wrong, or are you here because you need something? I both. What do you need? I need a job. There it was. The real reason for his sudden change of heart. You've been unemployed for almost 4 years. 3.5 years. And it's not for lack of trying. The market is tough, and my resume has some gaps now. And you thought I might be able to help. I heard that you're successful now, that you have a real business with employees. I thought maybe what? Maybe you could hire me. I have experience in business consulting, project management, strategic planning. I could be valuable to your organization. I leaned back in my chair, studying the man who'd called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear. Now he was sitting in my office, asking me for a job. What makes you think I'd hire you? Because I'm your son. Because family helps family. Family helps family, I repeated. Is that what you did when I was laid off from the diner? Did you help family then? That was different. How is it different? You didn't need help the way I need help now. I was 65 years old, Marcus. I'd been laid off after 20 years. My savings were minimal. I was facing an uncertain future. But you're right, I didn't need help the way you need help now. Because I didn't ask for it. Mom, please. It's Emma. You made it clear that you didn't want me as your mother. I was wrong about that. Were you? Or are you just desperate enough now to overlook how much you hate having me in your life? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was smaller, more honest. I'm in trouble, Mom. Real trouble. We're about to lose the townhouse. Stephanie is threatening to leave me. I can't find work anywhere, and I'm starting to think I never will. That sounds difficult. It is. And I know I have no right to ask, but you're my mother. You're the only family I have left. I was your mother 4 years ago, too. But you decided you didn't want me in that role. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. A big one. Can you forgive me? I already have. Hope flickered in his eyes. So you'll help me?
No.
The hope died instantly.
What?
I said I forgive you. I didn't say I'd help you. I don't understand. Marcus, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. And it doesn't mean putting myself in a position to be hurt the same way again. I wouldn't hurt you again. You hurt me when you had everything to lose by hurting me. Your only family, your biggest supporter, someone who loved you unconditionally. Now you have everything to lose by hurting me again. Your only chance at employment, your financial salvation, your way out of the mess you've made. Which version of you should I trust? The version that's learned from his mistakes. What have you learned? That I was wrong to push you away. That family is important. That I need you in my life. You need me in your life, or you need what I can do for your life. Both. At least you're honest about it. Marcus leaned forward desperately. Mom, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll work for minimum wage. I'll start at the bottom. I'll prove myself to you. Why should I give you that chance? Because I'm your son. Are you? Because 3.5 years ago, you made it very clear that being your mother was a job I'd failed at. You fired me from that position, Marcus. You told me my services were no longer required. I didn't mean it. You meant every word.
And you were probably right.
I wasn't a very good mother if I raised a son who could treat his family the way you treated me. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what fair would be, Marcus. Fair would be if you'd called me once in 3.5 years to check on how I was doing. Fair would be if you'd shown some interest in my welfare instead of only contacting me when you needed something. Fair would be if you'd had enough character to own your mistakes without needing a desperate situation to motivate your apology. Marcus was crying now, and it should have broken my heart. Once upon a time, it would have. But the woman I'd become had learned that tears without change are just manipulation. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't know where else to turn. Have you considered that maybe this is exactly what you deserve? What do you mean? You call me bad luck, Marcus. You said I was the reason for all your problems. Well, I've been out of your life for 3.5 years. How's that working out for you? It's not. Maybe the problem was never me. Maybe the problem was you. Maybe you're the common denominator in all your failures. Please don't say that. Why not?
It's what you said to me.
You told me I was toxic, negative, a curse that ruined everything I touched. I disappeared from your life, like you demanded. So, if you're still failing, what does that tell you? Marcus had no answer for that. Your 5 minutes are up, I said, standing. My assistant will show you out. Mom, please. It's Emma. And my decision is final. What am I supposed to do? The same thing you told me to do when you threw me away. Figure it out yourself. As Marcus left my office, broken and desperate, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete and total power over someone who'd once had complete and total power over me. The boy who'd called me bad luck had just learned what real bad luck looked like, needing help from someone you treated like garbage. And getting exactly what you deserved. Nothing. The encounter with Marcus in my office shook me more than I wanted to admit. Not because I felt sorry for him. I didn't. But because it crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. My success felt incomplete without him knowing about it. For 3.5 years, I'd built an empire in secret, invisible to the son who dismissed me as worthless. But seeing his shock in my office, his desperate attempt to reconnect now that I had something he needed, made me realize that my revenge had been too subtle. Marcus needed to understand the full scope of what he'd thrown away. He needed to see exactly how wrong he'd been about me, how small and limited his own vision had been, and how completely our positions had reversed. He needed to know that the mother he'd called bad luck was now someone he could never reach, never deserve, and never have back. 2 days after Marcus's visit, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to the corporate event I'd planned in Manhattan. Not just to oversee the catering and logistics, but to make sure Marcus saw me there. Because Marcus would be there. I'd done my research after his visit. His desperation hadn't been knacked. He really was in serious financial trouble. His consulting work had dried up, he'd been rejected for every job he'd applied for, and he was facing foreclosure on the townhouse within 60 days. But I'd also discovered something else. Marcus had been taking odd jobs to make ends meet, including temporary work for the very company whose event I was managing. The corporation had hired several temporary workers for data entry and administrative support during their busy season. Marcus Johnson, Princeton graduate and former rising star, was working as a temp for $15 an hour. The irony was perfect. The son who'd been too important to include his mother in his successful life would now be working as temporary help at an event managed by that same mother, an event that would showcase exactly how successful she'd become without him. I spent the week before the event planning every detail of my appearance and presentation. I wanted to look like what I'd become, a successful, powerful businesswoman who belonged in rooms full of corporate executives and industry leaders. The day of the event, I arrived at the Manhattan office building where Marcus had once worked, where I'd once visited feeling small and out of place. Now I was returning as the woman in charge, the person everyone else had to impress. My team had already been setting up for hours. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant dining space that would rival anything in the city. Every detail was perfect, from the lighting to the floral arrangements to the place settings that cost more per person than Marcus was making per day. I walked through the space, checking final details and making sure everything met my standards. In a few hours, this room would be filled with some of the most powerful people in business, all celebrating at an event I'd created. At 4 p.m., I spotted him. Marcus was at a desk in the outer office, wearing an ill-fitting shirt and tie, typing data into a computer with the focused intensity of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. He looked older than his 37 years, worn down by rejection and financial stress. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood there for a moment, watching him work at a job that would have horrified him 5 years ago, and felt something that might have been pity if it weren't so satisfying. "Everything looks perfect, Emma," my assistant said, approaching with a clipboard of final details. "The speakers are ready, the catering staff is in position, and the first guest should arrive in about an hour." "Excellent," I said, loud enough for my voice to carry across the office. Marcus looked up at the sound of my voice. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw the exact moment he recognized me and realized where he was. His face went white. He'd known his mother was successful now, but seeing me here, in command of an event at his workplace, drove home the reality of how far our positions had diverged. I smiled at him. Not a warm, motherly smile, but the cool, professional smile I gave to people who worked for companies I serviced. "Marcus," I said, walking over to his desk. "I didn't expect to see you here." I work here, he stammered. Temporarily. Data entry. How interesting. I'm managing tonight's shareholder event. The full impact hit him then. His mother, the woman he'd called bad luck and ordered to disappear, was running the most important corporate event his temporary employer hosted all year. You're managing this event? Emma's Elegant Occasions has been retained to handle all aspects of tonight's shareholder meeting and gala. We're expecting about 500 guests, including most of the Fortune 500 CEOs in the region. Marcus looked around the office with new eyes, seeing my staff directing preparations, seeing the transformation that was taking place under my supervision, seeing the evidence of success and competence he'd never imagined I possessed. I had no idea you were involved with this. Why would you? We don't exactly keep in touch. Mom. It's Emma, Marcus. We established that in my office.
Right. Emma.
This is incredible. You're running an event this big. This is actually fairly typical for us. Last month, we handled a product launch for a tech company with 800 guests. Next month, we're managing a charity gala for a children's hospital that's expecting 1,200 attendees. Each detail was a small knife, driving home how wrong he'd been about my capabilities and potential. I'm impressed, he said quietly. Are you? Or are you just surprised that the small-town, limited woman you described turned out to be capable of more than you imagined? Marcus flinched. I deserve that. Yes, you do. Emma, about what I said when I came to your office. You asked for a job. I said no. That conversation is over. But seeing what you've built, maybe there's a place for me in your organization. I could bring valuable experience. Marcus, let me stop you right there. The answer is no. It was no 3 days ago. It's no today, and it will be no tomorrow.
But why?
I'm qualified. I'm desperate, and I'm your son. You're not my son. You fired me from that job, remember? You made it very clear that having me as your mother was holding you back, damaging your life, keeping you trapped in a small-minded mentality. I was wrong. Were you? Because it seems to me that your life has gotten significantly worse since you got rid of the bad luck you blamed for all your problems. Marcus looked around the office again, taking in the bustling activity of my successful business operation. What do you want me to say? I don't want you to say anything. I want you to understand something. The woman you threw away as worthless has become someone you can never have back. The mother you blamed for your failures is now someone whose success highlights your own inadequacy. That's cruel. Is it? Because I think what's cruel is calling your mother bad luck and demanding she disappear from your life. What I'm doing is just living well despite your cruelty. I made a mistake. You made a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to prioritize your pride over your family. You chose Stephanie's opinion over your mother's welfare. You chose convenience over loyalty. You chose cruelty over compassion. I know. Do you? Because even now, even after seeing what I've accomplished, you're still approaching this as a transaction. You're not here because you've realized you love me. You're here because you need what I can provide. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What if both things are true? What if I need your help and I've realized I love you? Then you should have realized you loved me when you didn't need my help. Love that only appears when it's profitable isn't love, Marcus. It's just desperation with better marketing. I looked at my watch. I need to finish preparing for tonight's event. Some of the most important people in business will be here soon, and everything needs to be perfect. Will I see you again? You'll see me all evening. I'll be managing this event, making sure everything runs smoothly, networking with CEOs and industry leaders. You'll be at your desk, doing data entry for $15 an hour. I meant after tonight.
No, Marcus.
You won't see me after tonight. Because after tonight, I'll go back to my successful life, and you'll go back to your struggling one. We'll both continue to live with the consequences of the choices we've made. Please, Mom.
Emma.
Please, Emma. I'm begging you. I've lost everything. My career, my house, my marriage is falling apart. You're the only person left who might help me. And whose fault is that? It's all my fault. Yes, it is. You created this situation by burning bridges with the only person who loved you unconditionally. You made yourself into someone who had nowhere to turn when you needed help. I can't change the past. No, you can't. But you could have made different choices. You could have maintained relationships instead of destroying them. You could have valued family instead of dismissing it. You could have been grateful instead of entitled. I understand that now. You understand it now because you need something. Where was this understanding when you didn't need anything from me? Marcus had no answer for that. Enjoy the event tonight, Marcus. You'll have a front row seat to see what the woman you called bad luck has accomplished. Try to remember that everything you'll witness, the success, the respect, the achievement, could have been shared with you if you'd made different choices. I walked away, leaving him sitting at his temporary desk, finally understanding the full scope of what he'd thrown away when he'd thrown me away. The event that night was flawless. Every detail executed perfectly, every guest impressed, every goal exceeded. I moved through the ballroom in my designer dress, commanding respect from Fortune 500 CEOs, solving problems with authority, and basking in the kind of professional success Marcus had never achieved even at his peak. Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of him at his desk through the glass doors of the ballroom. Still typing, still working his temporary job, still seeing but not participating in the world of success his mother now inhabited. During the networking reception, the CEO of the host company pulled me aside. Emma, this has been exceptional. Truly world-class. We're already discussing retaining your company for next year's event, and I'd like to recommend you to several of my colleagues who are looking for event management services. That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Richardson. We pride ourselves on exceeding expectations. You've certainly done that. Tell me, how did you get into this business? Your background is fascinating. I started later in life than most entrepreneurs. Sometimes the best opportunities come after we stop limiting ourselves to other people's expectations of what we're capable of. Wise words. I'd love to feature your story in our corporate newsletter, if you're interested. The woman who built an empire after 60 foot. I think it would inspire a lot of our readers. I'd be honored. As the evening wound down, I supervised the cleanup while guests lingered, many of them handing me business cards and discussing future opportunities. My assistant handed me a folder full of potential new contracts. Emma, we got inquiries from 6 different companies tonight, she said excitedly. This could double our corporate business. Excellent work, everyone. This was exactly the kind of event that establishes our reputation at the highest level. As I gathered my things to leave, I saw Marcus still at his desk. The party was over, the guests had gone home, but the temporary workers had to finish their data entry before leaving. I walked over to his desk one final time. How was your evening, Marcus? He looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of awe, regret, and despair. I watched the whole thing. You were incredible. Professional, confident, in complete control. I've never seen anything like it. That was just a typical evening for me now. I keep trying to reconcile the woman I saw tonight with the mother I remember. The mother you remember was never given the chance to be the woman you saw tonight. She was too busy sacrificing her potential for her son's needs. I robbed you of so much. Yes, you did. But ironically, you also freed me to discover what I was really capable of when I wasn't limiting myself to your expectations. I don't know how to live with what I've done. That's not my problem anymore, Marcus. Will you ever forgive me? I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means I'm not angry anymore. What does it mean for us? There is no us. There's you, struggling with the consequences of your choices. And there's me, thriving despite them. Those are two separate stories now. I turned to leave, then paused. Marcus, I want you to remember tonight. I want you to remember that the mother you called bad luck and ordered to disappear turned out to be someone extraordinary. I want you to remember that every accusation you made about me, that I was limited, small-minded, holding you back, was actually true about you. Mom, I want you to remember that you had someone in your life who loved you unconditionally, supported your dreams, and would have shared in your successes. And you threw her away because she embarrassed you. Please. Most of all, I want you to remember that when you needed someone to help you, to give you a chance, to show you mercy, all things I would have done without question before you showed me who you really are, you had to sit at a desk and watch that someone succeed without you. I left him there, finally understanding the full weight of his choices, finally seeing what real bad luck looked like when you created it yourself. As I drove home to my beautiful house, I felt something I'd never felt before, complete and total victory over someone who had once had complete and total power to hurt me. Marcus would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he'd lost when he lost me. And I would spend the rest of mine proving, every single day, that I had never needed him at all. The weeks following the Manhattan event brought a flood of new business opportunities. Mr. Richardson had been true to his word, recommending Emma's elegant occasions to his network of corporate executives. The feature article in their newsletter, titled From Diner Waitress to Business Empire, Emma Johnson's remarkable second act, was picked up by business journals and shared widely on social media. But more satisfying than the new contracts was the knowledge that Marcus had witnessed my triumph firsthand. He'd seen me command a room full of the most successful people in business. He'd watched me operate at a level he'd never achieved, even at his peak. I was arranging flowers in my home office when Dorothy called with news that made my day even better. Emma, honey, you're never going to believe what I just heard at the grocery store. What's that? Marcus and Stephanie are getting divorced. I felt a surge of satisfaction that probably wasn't charitable, but was certainly earned. Really? Apparently, she filed papers last week. My neighbor's daughter works at the law firm handling it. Says Stephanie is claiming irreconcilable differences and asking for alimony. Alimony from someone who doesn't have a job? That's the beautiful part. She can't get blood from a stone. Turns out when you marry someone for their success and they stop being successful, the marriage doesn't have much left to hold it together. Stephanie, who had encouraged Marcus to cut me out of his life, who had looked down on my modest house and working-class background, was now discovering what happened when you bet everything on a man's career and he turned out to be a failure. There's more, Dorothy continued. Word is they're losing the townhouse. Marcus apparently tried to get some kind of emergency loan to save it, but no bank would touch him. They've got 30 days to get out. Marcus was losing everything: his job, his marriage, his home, his future. Everything he'd built his identity around was crumbling, while the mother he'd blamed for his problems was thriving beyond his wildest imagination. I almost feel sorry for him, Dorothy said. Almost. I don't, I replied, surprising myself with the coldness in my voice. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. You really have become ruthless, haven't you? I've become honest. For 34 years, I made excuses for Marcus's selfishness, rationalized his cruelty, and enabled his entitlement. I called it love, but it was really just fear of losing the only person I thought I had. And now I know that losing someone who treats you badly isn't actually a loss. It's liberation. That afternoon, I was reviewing catering proposals when my assistant knocked on my door. Emma, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's your daughter-in-law. Stephanie. This was unexpected. Send her in. Stephanie walked into my office looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who used to judge my modest lifestyle. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were red from crying. The woman who'd once looked down on me was now coming to me as a supplicant. "Mrs. Johnson, thank you for seeing me. It's Ms. Johnson now. I went back to my maiden name after the divorce. What can I do for you, Stephanie?"
I'm divorcing Marcus.
I heard. Congratulations. She looked surprised by my response. Congratulations? You're escaping a marriage to a man who blames other people for his problems and takes no responsibility for his failures. That seems like something to celebrate. I'm not here to talk about Marcus. Then why are you here? I'm here to apologize. That was unexpected. For what? For encouraging Marcus to cut you out of our lives. For supporting his decision to blame you for his problems. For looking down on you when you visited our house. Why are you apologizing now? Because I understand now how wrong I was. About you, about Marcus, about everything. What changed your mind? Watching him fall apart over the past 4 years. Seeing how he handles failure. Realizing that every problem he blamed on you got worse after you were gone. And seeing what you've accomplished. Marcus told me about your business, about the event you managed where he was working. I looked you up online, saw the articles, the success stories. I realized that the woman I dismissed as small town and limited has achieved more than I ever will. Is this going somewhere, Stephanie? I want to ask you for help. There it was. The real reason for her visit. What kind of help? I need a job. I've been out of the workforce for 3 years, and my resume has gaps. The divorce will leave me with almost nothing. Marcus doesn't have any assets to split. I need to rebuild my life, and I was hoping you might consider hiring me. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd encouraged my son to abandon me was now asking me to save her from the consequences of marrying a failure. What makes you think I'd hire you? Because I have skills. I have an MBA, experience in finance, project management capabilities. I could be valuable to your organization. Those are your qualifications. I asked what makes you think I'd hire you. Because I'm asking for help and you're a generous person? Am I? What gave you that impression? Marcus said you were always helping people, always putting other people's needs first. Marcus said a lot of things about me. Most of them were wrong. Stephanie looked confused. I don't understand. The woman Marcus described, the one who always helped people and put others first, that woman doesn't exist anymore. She died the day her son called her bad luck and ordered her to disappear. But surely you wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Refuse to help someone who encouraged my abandonment? Someone who looked down on me and made it clear I wasn't welcome in my own son's life. I made a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to side with a selfish, ungrateful man against his mother. You chose to encourage cruelty over compassion. You chose to judge someone based on their bank account rather than their character. I was wrong. Yes, you were. And now you're facing the consequences of backing the wrong horse. Mrs. Johnson, I'm desperate. Ms. Johnson. And your desperation isn't my problem. Please. I don't have anywhere else to turn. Neither did I when your husband threw me away. Did you speak up for me then? Did you suggest he reconsider? Did you remind him that I was family?
No.
That's right. You didn't. In fact, you encouraged him to cut me off completely. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't undo damage, Stephanie. Sorry doesn't erase the years of pain you helped cause. Sorry is just something people say when they need something from you. What do you want me to do? Nothing. I want you to do nothing. I want you to leave my office and figure out your own solution to the mess you helped create. But I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. When I had nowhere to go, when my son told me to disappear from his life, where were you? Were you advocating for me? Were you reminding him that family matters? Were you suggesting compassion? I was supporting my husband. You were supporting cruelty. You were enabling abandonment. You were choosing sides against an innocent woman who'd never done anything but love her son. Stephanie started crying. Please don't do this. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you. I'm doing exactly what you encouraged Marcus to do to me. I'm refusing to let your problems become my responsibility. This is revenge. No, this is justice. Revenge would be me actively trying to hurt you. Justice is me simply refusing to save you from the consequences of your own choices. You're not the person Marcus described. You're right. The person Marcus described was weak, easily manipulated, and desperate for approval. The person sitting across from you is strong, successful, and completely indifferent to your opinion of her. What happened to you? I grew up. I stopped accepting mistreatment from people who thought they were better than me. I stopped making other people's problems my responsibility. So, you won't help me? I won't help you. Even though you could, especially because I could. I have the power to save you from this situation, just like I had the power to love and support Marcus unconditionally. But power without boundaries is just enabling, and I'm done enabling people who treat me badly. Stephanie stood up, defeat written across her face. I hope you can live with yourself. I can live with myself very comfortably. The question is, can you live with the choices you made when you had the chance to be a decent person? After she left, I sat in my office feeling something I hadn't expected, complete indifference. 5 years ago, seeing Stephanie in distress would have triggered my protective instincts. I would have wanted to help, would have felt guilty for having more than someone else needed. But the woman I'd become understood something the old Emma hadn't. Not everyone deserves to be saved. Some people create their own problems through selfishness and cruelty, and saving them from consequences just enables more selfishness and cruelty. Stephanie had made her choice when she encouraged Marcus to abandon me. Now she got to live with the results of choosing poorly. A week later, Dorothy brought me more news. Marcus had to move back in with his mother-in-law, she said, barely containing her amusement. His mother-in-law? Stephanie's mother. Apparently, the divorce left him with nowhere to go, and she's the only person who would take him in. Can you imagine? A 37-year-old man living in his ex-mother-in-law's basement. The irony was perfect. Marcus, who'd been too embarrassed by his working-class mother to maintain a relationship with her, was now dependent on charity from the mother of the woman who'd left him. It gets better, Dorothy continued. Stephanie's mother apparently makes him do chores around the house in exchange for room and board. Yard work, cleaning, grocery shopping. The Princeton graduate is basically working as a live-in handyman. How do you know all this? Small world, honey. Stephanie's mother goes to my church. She's been complaining to anyone who'll listen about her deadbeat ex-son-in-law who's too proud to take a real job, but not too proud to live in my basement. Marcus had fallen so far that he was now the subject of church lady gossip, living as a charity case in the home of someone who openly resented his presence. She also mentioned that he talks about you constantly, about the business you built, the success you've achieved, how wrong he was about everything. Does he? According to her, he's obsessed with finding a way to make amends. He apparently spends hours researching your company online, reading every article about you, trying to figure out how to get back into your good graces. The idea of Marcus obsessing over my success while living in his ex-mother-in-law's basement was deeply satisfying. He was finally experiencing what it felt like to be dependent on someone who didn't respect him, to have nowhere else to turn, to be at the mercy of someone else's charity. All things I'd experienced when he'd abandoned me. What does he think making amends would look like? I asked. That's the pathetic part. He apparently thinks if he can just prove how sorry he is, how much he's learned, you'll take him back and give him a job. After everything he's done? The man who called you bad luck and demanded you disappear from his life actually believes you owe him another chance because he's finally realized you were valuable. The delusion was stunning but not surprising. Marcus had always believed the world owed him things: success, respect, opportunities, forgiveness. Even now, even after losing everything, he still thought his problems were someone else's responsibility to solve. He's in for a disappointment.
Good.
That boy needs to learn that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. 3 months later, the disappointment Dorothy had predicted came to pass in the most public way possible. I was attending a business networking event at the city's most exclusive hotel when I spotted Marcus across the room. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit that had probably come from a discount store, and he looked completely out of place among the successful professionals gathered for the event. He'd clearly come looking for me. I watched him make his way through the crowd, stopping to ask people if they knew Emma Johnson from Emma's Elegant Occasions. Several people pointed in my direction, and I could see him gathering courage for what he probably thought would be another chance to plead his case. I was talking with a group of potential clients when he approached. "Mom," he said, interrupting our conversation. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" The use of "mom" in front of my business associates was deliberate, an attempt to use our relationship to guilt me into giving him attention. "I'm sorry," I said coolly. "I think you have me confused with someone else."
Mom, it's me.
"Marcus, your son." "I don't have a son," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. The shock on his face was complete. He'd expected resistance, arguments, maybe even anger. He hadn't expected complete denial of his existence. "Please don't do this," he whispered. "Not here." "Do what?" "I'm simply stating a fact. I don't have a son." "Yes, you do. You have me." "No, I don't. I had a son once, but he fired me from that job. He told me I was bad luck and demanded that I disappear from his life."
So I did.
And when you disappear from someone's life completely, they stop being your family. The business associates I'd been talking with were watching this exchange with obvious discomfort and growing understanding of what was happening. "Mom, please. My name is Emma Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of Emma's Elegant Occasions. I don't know who you are or what you want, but you're interrupting a business conversation. I just need 5 minutes. Sir, you need to leave. You're disrupting a private networking event, and you're making my colleagues uncomfortable." Marcus looked around at the faces watching him, successful professionals who were seeing him as exactly what he was, a desperate, unemployed man trying to use a family connection to get what he needed. "I'm your son," he said one more time, his voice breaking. "I don't have a son," I repeated. "I invested 34 years in raising a boy I thought would grow up to be a man of character. But that investment failed. The boy I raised became someone who abandons family when they're inconvenient and only remembers love when he needs something. Please. Since that's not the kind of person I'd want as a son, I've decided I don't have one. It's much simpler that way." I turned back to my colleagues, effectively dismissing him. I apologize for the interruption. Now, where were we discussing the hospital gala? Marcus stood there for another moment, finally understanding that his connection to me was not only severed, but would never be restored. Then he walked away, shoulders slumped, looking like a man who'd lost his last hope. One of the executives I'd been talking with waited until Marcus was out of earshot before speaking. "That was your son?" "That was a stranger who used to be my son." "What happened?" "He decided he was too successful to need his family. So when he stopped being successful, he stopped having family." That's brutal. That's justice. The story of Marcus's public rejection spread through the local business community within days. Everyone knew that Emma Johnson, the successful entrepreneur, had publicly disowned her son at a networking event. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core message was clear. Marcus had done something so unforgivable that his own mother wouldn't acknowledge his existence. The humiliation was complete and public. Marcus wasn't just unemployed and homeless. He was now known as the man whose own mother had rejected him in front of a room full of business leaders. A week later, Dorothy brought me the final piece of news in Marcus's fall from grace.
He's leaving town, she said.
Stephanie's mother kicked him out, and he's got nowhere else to go. Word is he's moving to another state to try to start over where nobody knows his story.
Good, I said.
Maybe a fresh start will teach him to value the relationships he builds instead of taking them for granted. Do you think he'll ever understand what he did wrong? I think he understands perfectly what he did wrong. The question is whether he'll ever understand why it can't be undone. What do you mean? Marcus thinks this is about forgiveness. He thinks if he can just say the right words, show enough remorse, prove how much he's learned, I'll take him back. But it's not about forgiveness. It's about trust. You don't trust him anymore. How can I? He showed me who he really is when he thought he didn't need me. He revealed that his love was conditional, his loyalty was temporary, and his respect was based on what I could do for him. Why would I trust someone like that with my heart again? So, this is really forever? This is really forever. Marcus burned a bridge that can't be rebuilt, broke a trust that can't be repaired, and proved himself to be someone I wouldn't choose to have in my life, even if we weren't related. Do you ever regret how this turned out? I thought about that question seriously. Did I regret that my relationship with my son was permanently severed? Did I regret that he was struggling while I was thriving? Did I regret being the kind of person who could cut off family completely? No, I said finally. I regret that I raised a son who could treat his mother the way Marcus treated me. I regret that I enabled his selfishness for so many years by always putting his needs first. I regret that I didn't have better boundaries when he was young. But you don't regret cutting him off. Dorothy, Marcus taught me something valuable. Not everyone deserves unlimited chances. Some people prove through their actions that they're not worthy of your love, your trust, or your energy. Continuing to invest in them after they've shown you who they are isn't love, it's just enabling. And Marcus showed you who he is. Marcus showed me who he is. And I believed him. As Dorothy left that evening, I sat in my beautiful home, surrounded by the evidence of my success, and felt something I'd never felt before, complete peace with my choices. I'd given Marcus every opportunity to be a good son. I'd sacrificed my dreams for his needs, supported his ambitions at the cost of my own, and loved him unconditionally for 34 years. When he'd shown me that none of that mattered to him, when he'd revealed that he saw me as an embarrassment and a burden, I'd finally learned to value myself enough to walk away. Now he was gone, struggling in some other city with the consequences of his choices, while I was thriving in the life I'd built without him. Some people might call that heartless. I called it justice. Marcus had wanted me to disappear from his life when he thought he didn't need me. I'd granted that wish completely. Now, when he desperately needed me, I was nowhere to be found. Just as he'd demanded. He'd gotten exactly what he'd asked for. And I'd gotten something I'd never expected. The freedom to discover who I was when I wasn't limiting myself to be someone else's mother. It turned out I was magnificent. 5 years after Marcus had called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear, Emma's Elegant Occasions had become a multi-million-dollar enterprise with locations in 3 states. I was featured in Forbes as one of the 50 entrepreneurs over 50 who are changing business, and my story had become a case study in business schools about successful career pivots later in life. But the victory that meant the most to me wasn't financial or professional, it was personal. I discovered that I was capable of building a life so complete, so satisfying, so successful that I didn't need Marcus in it at all. For 34 years, I defined myself as his mother. Now I was Emma Johnson, CEO, entrepreneur, and proof that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be when you stop limiting yourself to who other people need you to be. I was reviewing expansion plans for a fourth location when my assistant brought me a package that had been delivered by courier. There was no return address, just my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Inside was a letter from Marcus. "Dear Mom," it began, and I almost threw it away without reading further. But curiosity got the better of me. "I know you don't want to hear from me, and I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it. But I need to try one more time to make you understand how sorry I am for everything I did to you. I've spent the last 5 years learning what it feels like to be abandoned, to have nowhere to turn, to need help from people who don't care about you. I've lived in basements, worked jobs that barely pay enough to survive, and been rejected by everyone I've asked for help. Now I understand what I put you through when I threw you away. Now I know what it feels like to be called worthless by someone you love. Now I've experienced the desperation of needing someone who doesn't want you in their life. I deserved everything that happened to me. I deserved to lose my job, my marriage, my home, my future. I deserved to be humiliated and rejected and left with nothing, because that's exactly what I did to you. But Mom, I've changed. I've learned. I've become someone different than the selfish, ungrateful man who called you bad luck. I've spent 5 years thinking about what I lost when I lost you, and I know now that I threw away the best thing in my life. I'm not asking for money.
I'm not asking for a job.
I'm not asking for anything except the chance to earn your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm hoping that somewhere in your heart, there's still a piece of the mother who loved me unconditionally. I've enclosed my address if you want to write back. If you don't, I'll understand. But please know that I love you. I'm sorry, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting what I did to us. Your son, Marcus. I read the letter twice, waiting to feel something. Sadness, anger, sympathy, anything. But all I felt was a mild irritation that he disrupted my day with his problems. The Marcus who'd written this letter sounded sincere, remorseful, and genuinely changed. 5 years ago, hearing him admit his mistakes and express real understanding of the pain he'd caused would have meant everything to me. But 5 years ago, I was a different woman. A woman who was desperate for her son's love and approval. A woman who would have done anything to rebuild their relationship. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that loving someone who hurts you isn't noble, it's just self-destructive. I picked up the letter and dropped it in the trash without a second thought. The next morning, I found another envelope on my desk. This one contained a newspaper clipping from Marcus's new city, where he'd apparently given an interview to a local reporter about his journey of redemption. The article was titled "From Privilege to Poverty: One Man's Fall and His Quest for Forgiveness." It detailed Marcus's story, his successful early career, his devastating job loss, and his admission that he'd destroyed the most important relationship in his life through arrogance and ingratitude. "I had everything," Marcus was quoted as saying. "A great job, a beautiful home, a loving mother who'd sacrificed everything for my success. And I threw it all away because I was embarrassed by where I came from." The article described his current circumstances, living in a studio apartment, working 2 part-time jobs, struggling to make ends meet. But it also portrayed him as someone who'd learned from his mistakes and was trying to make amends. "I'm not the same person who treated my mother so cruelly," Marcus said in the interview. "I've learned what it means to struggle, to be rejected, to have nowhere to turn. I understand now what I put her through, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn her forgiveness." The reporter had obviously been moved by Marcus's story. The article presented him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of success and entitlement, but also as someone who genuinely learned from his mistakes. What the article didn't mention was that Marcus's newfound humility had only emerged after he'd lost everything. that his understanding of struggle had only developed when he was the one struggling, that his appreciation for family had only surfaced when he needed someone to save him. I showed the article to Dorothy during our weekly coffee. "He's certainly trying hard to rehabilitate his image," she said after reading it. "He's trying to create a narrative where he's the hero of his own redemption story instead of the villain of mine." "You think the change isn't real?" "I think the change is real, but I also think it's irrelevant." "How so?" "Dorothy, if someone breaks your leg and then later they feel really bad about it and promise never to break anyone's leg again, does that unbreak your leg?"
No.
Marcus broke something in me when he called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear. He killed the mother who loved him unconditionally. The fact that he's sorry now doesn't bring her back. But people can change. Yes, they can. But change doesn't erase consequences. Marcus can become a completely different person, and I'll still be someone who knows what he's capable of when he thinks he doesn't need you. So there's really no path back for him? None at all. Because even if I believed his change was permanent, which I don't, I'm not the same person I was when he abandoned me. I'm not the desperate, lonely woman who would take him back just to have family again. What are you now? I'm someone who knows her worth. Someone who won't accept mistreatment from anyone, regardless of DNA. Someone who's built a life so complete that I don't need anyone who doesn't deserve to be in it. The letters kept coming. Marcus wrote to me every week for 6 months, each one more desperate than the last. He sent newspaper clippings about his volunteer work at homeless shelters. He included photos of himself doing community service. He forwarded references from his employers praising his work ethic and humility. All evidence that he'd become a better person. None of it enough to make me care. The final letter was different. Instead of begging for forgiveness, it was an acceptance of defeat. "Dear Mom," it read, "I understand now that you're never going to forgive me. I understand that I destroyed something that can't be repaired. I understand that the mother who loved me is gone, and the woman you've become doesn't need me in her life. I wanted you to know that I'm okay with that. Not happy about it, but okay with it. Because you deserve to live your life free from the pain I caused you. You deserve to be successful and happy without having to worry about whether I'll hurt you again. I've accepted that I'll never have a relationship with my mother again. I've accepted that I'll never get to share in your success or be part of your life. I've accepted that the consequence of my choices is permanent loneliness. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I read every article about your business, watch every interview you give, and follow your success from afar. The woman you've become is incredible, strong, successful, and completely self-sufficient. I'm sorry I never got to meet her. I'm sorry I only knew the woman who limited herself to be my mother. I'm sorry that my cruelty was what freed you to become who you were meant to be. I won't write to you again. I'll stop trying to contact you. Stop hoping for reconciliation. Stop believing that love can overcome the damage I did. I'll live with my choices, and you'll live with yours. But please know that somewhere out there, there's a man who understands exactly what he lost when he lost you. A man who knows he threw away the best thing in his life. A man who will spend every day for the rest of his life knowing he had everything and destroyed it with his own hands. Goodbye, Mom. I hope your life is everything you've made it and more. Marcus. I read that letter 3 times, waiting for it to move me, waiting for some maternal instinct to kick in, some desire to reach out to my broken child and offer comfort. Nothing came. The woman who would have cried over that letter, who would have seen it as an opening for reconciliation, who would have been moved by her son's pain, that woman had died the day Marcus called her bad luck. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and completely immune to manipulation disguised as remorse. I filed the letter with all the others in a folder labeled Closed Accounts. That evening, Patricia called to discuss our expansion into the West Coast market. "Emma, the Los Angeles venue we've been looking at just became available. The owners are motivated to sell, and the price is better than we expected. What's our timeline? We could close within 60 days if we move quickly. Are you ready to expand to California? I'm ready for anything. Let's do it. After we hung up, I walked through my beautiful home, looking at the awards on my walls, the photos from high-profile events, the evidence of a life built entirely on my own terms. Marcus was somewhere out there, working 2 part-time jobs and living in a studio apartment, finally understanding what he'd thrown away when he'd thrown me away. And I was here, running a multi-million-dollar business, planning expansion into new markets, and living a life that exceeded anything I'd ever dreamed possible. The boy who'd called me bad luck had turned out to be the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. His cruelty had freed me to discover who I really was when I wasn't limiting myself to be his mother. I'd spent 34 years sacrificing my potential for his needs. I'd spend the rest of my life proving that I'd never needed him at all. Some people might call that cold. I called it justice. Marcus had wanted me to disappear when he thought he was too successful to need me. I disappeared so completely that even when he desperately needed me, I was beyond his reach. He'd gotten exactly what he'd asked for. And I'd gotten something far better than I'd ever imagined, the freedom to become magnificent. 7 years after Marcus had called me bad luck, Emma's Elegant Occasions was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as the comeback company of the year. The article detailed how a laid-off diner waitress had built a $50 million event management empire with venues in 6 states and contracts with Fortune 500 companies. But the success story that meant the most to me was personal. I'd been invited to give the commencement address at my local community college, speaking to graduates who were starting their careers later in life. 7 years ago, I told the crowd of students, faculty, and families, someone I loved told me I was bad luck. They said I was holding them back, limiting their potential, and needed to disappear from their life. That rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, many of them older students who'd returned to school after setbacks or life changes. Because when someone sets you free from the obligation to sacrifice yourself for their success, you discover what you're capable of when you're building your own. When someone stops needing you to be small so they can feel big, you can finally become the person you were meant to be. The audience erupted in applause. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached me to share their own stories of rejection and reinvention. I realized that my story had become more than just personal triumph. It had become inspiration for anyone who'd been underestimated or discarded. That evening, Dorothy and I celebrated at the city's finest restaurant, the same one where Marcus had once taken business clients and made me feel out of place with my modest clothes and working-class mannerisms. Remember when you used to feel intimidated coming to places like this? Dorothy asked, raising her glass of champagne. I remember when I thought places like this were for other people who belonged in a world I'd never be part of. And now I own 3 restaurants fancier than this one. It was true. My expansion into hospitality had included acquiring several high-end establishments that catered to the same clientele who attended our events. Emma, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever wonder what Marcus thinks when he reads about your success? When he sees articles about your business empire, your achievements, your recognition? I considered the question. I hope it destroys him a little more each time. Dorothy looked surprised by the harshness of my answer. That's pretty cold, honey. Is it? Marcus spent 4 years destroying me piece by piece with his rejection, his shame, his cruelty. He made me feel worthless, useless, and unwanted. Why shouldn't he experience the same thing? Because you're better than he is.
No, Dorothy.
I'm smarter than he is. I learned from what he did to me. I learned that being better than someone who hurts you doesn't protect you from being hurt. It just makes you a more appealing target. So you want him to suffer? I want him to understand consequences. I want him to know that when you throw away something valuable, you don't get it back. I want him to live every day knowing that the mother he rejected became someone extraordinary without him. And if he's truly changed, if he's genuinely sorry, then he's learned an expensive lesson about the importance of treating people well the first time. But learning that lesson doesn't entitle him to forgiveness from the people he hurt while he was learning it. That night, I went home to my mansion, a beautiful colonial estate I'd purchased the previous year, and found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. No postmark, which meant it had been delivered by hand. Inside was a single newspaper clipping from Marcus's current city. The headline read, "Local man dies in car accident." For a moment, my heart stopped. But the photo wasn't Marcus. It was someone else entirely, someone I didn't recognize. Attached to the clipping was a handwritten note. "This could have been me. I came here tonight planning to leave this under your door and then drive my car into a tree. But standing on your doorstep, seeing the life you've built, understanding how completely you've moved on without me, I realized that would be letting myself off too easy. Living with what I've done is a harder punishment than dying would be.
I won't contact you again.
I just wanted you to know that I understand now what my cruelty cost both of us." I read the note twice, then crumpled it up and threw it away. The old Emma would have been devastated by the thought of her child contemplating suicide. She would have called immediately, driven to wherever he was, done anything to save him from himself. But the old Emma had died 7 years ago, killed by the same cruelty that had apparently driven Marcus to consider ending his own life. The woman I'd become felt nothing but mild irritation that he disrupted my evening with his dramatic gesture. If Marcus wanted to threaten suicide as a way to get my attention, he'd chosen the wrong target. I'd already grieved the loss of my son. He died the day he called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear. What was left was just a stranger who shared some of my DNA and a history I'd moved past. The next morning, I called my security company and had them upgrade the systems at my home and office. If Marcus was unstable enough to consider suicide, he might be unstable enough to try something more direct. I also hired a private investigator to keep tabs on his location and activities. Not out of concern for his welfare, but to protect myself from any further disruptions he might attempt. The report came back within a week. Marcus was indeed struggling with depression and had been receiving mental health treatment. But he was also working steadily, paying his bills, and had apparently abandoned any thoughts of self-harm after his visit to my house. More importantly, he'd been telling people that he was done trying to reconnect with his mother and was focusing on accepting the consequences of his choices.
Good.
The last thing I needed was a desperate son making scenes at my business events or showing up at my home with increasingly dramatic gestures. 6 months later, I was featured in another magazine article, this time about successful women entrepreneurs over 65. The piece included a sidebar about my philosophy on family relationships that created quite a stir. "Family isn't about DNA," I was quoted as saying. "It's about mutual respect, support, and genuine care for each other's welfare." Some people are fortunate enough to be born into families that provide those things. Others have to build families with people who choose to love them rather than people who are obligated to love them. The interviewer had asked about my children, and I'd been honest. I don't have children. I invested 34 years in raising someone who turned out to be unworthy of that investment. It was a bad business decision, and I don't make the same mistake twice. The article generated hundreds of comments online, with people either praising my honesty or condemning my coldness. I didn't care about either reaction. I'd simply told the truth about my experience. But one comment caught my attention. It was from someone using the username, regretfulson38. "This woman is my mother. Everything she said about me is true. I was unworthy of her investment. I was cruel to someone who loved me unconditionally. I destroyed the best relationship in my life because I was embarrassed by where I came from. She's right to cut me off completely. I don't deserve her forgiveness, and I've stopped asking for it. I just want people to know that she didn't abandon her child abandoned her. And now she's built an incredible life without me, as she should have. The comment had hundreds of replies, most of them expressing sympathy for Marcus and criticism of my unwillingness to forgive. But a few stood out for their understanding. You burned that bridge yourself, dude. She doesn't owe you anything. Amazing how you found humility after you lost everything. Where was it when you had everything? Some lessons cost more than others. This one cost you your mother. I screenshotted the comment thread and filed it with Marcus's letters. Evidence that he'd finally accepted reality, that he'd stopped trying to insert himself back into my life, that he understood his rejection was permanent. It was everything I'd wanted to hear from him, delivered exactly the way I'd wanted to hear it, publicly, where everyone could see that he took full responsibility for the destruction of our relationship. But instead of feeling satisfied, I felt nothing. 7 years ago, Marcus's acknowledgement of his mistakes would have meant everything to me. His public acceptance of blame would have been vindication beyond my wildest dreams. Now it was just irrelevant noise from someone whose opinion no longer mattered to me. I'd moved so far beyond needing Marcus's validation or apology that getting both felt like receiving mail for a previous tenant, something that might have been important to someone else, but had nothing to do with my current life. That realization was perhaps the most complete victory of all. I'd not only built a life without Marcus, I'd built a life where Marcus's existence or non-existence was equally meaningless to me. He'd wanted me to disappear from his life. I'd disappeared so completely that he'd become invisible to mine. 10 years after Marcus had called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear, Emma's Elegant Occasions was sold to a major hospitality conglomerate for $180 million. I retained a controlling interest and stayed on as CEO, but the sale meant I was now worth more than I'd ever dreamed possible. The announcement made national news. From diner waitress to multimillionaire, the remarkable rise of Emma Johnson was featured in Forbes, Fortune, and Business Week. I was invited to speak at Harvard Business School, appeared on CNBC, and was profiled in a documentary about late-in-life entrepreneurs. But the moment that brought me the most satisfaction came during a charity gala I was hosting for children's education. I was speaking to a crowd of donors and community leaders when someone in the audience asked a question that stopped me cold. Ms. Johnson, you've mentioned that your success came after a personal loss that forced you to reevaluate your life. Can you tell us more about that experience? I looked out at the crowd of successful, accomplished people and made a decision to tell the truth. 10 years ago, my son called me to tell me I was bad luck. He said I was toxic, negative, and holding him back from success. He demanded that I disappear from his life completely. The audience was completely silent. That phone call was the most devastating moment of my life. I'd spent 34 years sacrificing everything for that child. My dreams, my ambitions, my financial security, my personal happiness. And he repaid that sacrifice by telling me I was worthless and demanding that I vanish. How did you respond? Someone called out. I did exactly what he asked. I disappeared from his life, completely. But instead of disappearing into obscurity like he expected, I disappeared into success. I used the freedom he'd given me to discover who I was when I wasn't limiting myself to be someone else's mother. And your relationship with your son now? I don't have a son, I said simply. I have a multi-million-dollar business, a beautiful life, and the satisfaction of knowing that the person who called me bad luck has spent the last 10 years watching me prove him wrong. The applause was thunderous, but what struck me most was the number of people who approached me afterward to share similar stories. Parents who'd been abandoned by ungrateful children, spouses who'd been left by partners who thought they'd found someone better, employees who'd been fired by bosses who later regretted the decision. "You've given us permission to stop accepting mistreatment from family," one woman told me. "My daughter has been emotionally abusing me for years, and I kept taking it because she's my child. But you're right, biology doesn't entitle anyone to treat you badly." That night, alone in my penthouse apartment overlooking the city, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From a broken woman standing in a driveway watching her life burn, to a business empire worth more than most people could imagine. Marcus had been wrong about everything. I wasn't bad luck. I was a force of nature that had been held back by his needs and expectations. I wasn't toxic or negative. I was someone who'd learned to value herself enough to reject toxic relationships. I wasn't limited or small-minded. I was someone who'd built something extraordinary when given the freedom to try. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to get rid of what he saw as dead weight, Marcus had freed me to become everything I was capable of being. His cruelty had been the catalyst for my transformation. He'd wanted me gone so he could succeed without me. Instead, I'd succeeded beyond his wildest imagination while he'd failed in ways he'd never imagined possible. A week after the charity gala, I received an email that surprised me. It was from a journalist who'd been covering my story for a book about successful entrepreneurs. "Miss Johnson, I've been researching your background for my book, and I came across something I thought you should know. Your son Marcus has been living in poverty for the past several years, but he recently started a non-profit organization that helps families affected by elder abuse and abandonment." The email included a link to a website for Second Chances Family Services, an organization that provided counseling and support for estranged family members trying to rebuild relationships. I clicked through the site, reading Marcus's story as he told it to potential donors and volunteers. He described his journey from privilege to poverty and his awakening to the importance of family relationships. What struck me most was how he'd positioned himself in the narrative. Not as someone who'd abandoned his family, but as someone who'd learned from his mistakes and was now helping others avoid making the same ones. "I know what it's like to lose everything because you didn't value what you had," he wrote on the organization's About page. "I know what it's like to realize too late that success means nothing without people who love you. My mission now is to help other families heal before they reach the point of no return that I reached with my own mother." The point of no return. At least he understood that much. But even in his attempt at redemption, Marcus was making it about himself. He wasn't helping families because he genuinely cared about their welfare. He was helping them to prove that he'd learned from his mistakes, to show the world that he'd become a better person. It was performative rehabilitation, and I wasn't impressed. The journalist's email continued. "I thought you should know that several people I interviewed mentioned that Marcus talks about you constantly. Apparently, he shows people articles about your success and tells them he's proud of what you've accomplished, even though he knows he'll never be part of it." Marcus was proud of me. The son who'd called me bad luck and an embarrassment was now proud of my success. The irony was delicious. I deleted the email without responding and went back to my work. Whatever Marcus was doing with his life now was irrelevant to mine. He could start 100 nonprofits, help 1,000 families, and spend the rest of his life proving he'd changed. None of it would alter the fact that he'd revealed his true character when he thought he didn't need me. 3 months later, I was attending a business conference in Chicago when I had an encounter that would prove to be the final chapter in my relationship with Marcus. I was leaving the conference hotel when I spotted a familiar figure across the street. Marcus was standing outside a community center talking to a small group of people who looked like they were attending some kind of support group meeting. He looked older, grayer, and was dressed in the kind of modest clothes I remembered from my own working-class days. But there was something different about his posture, his demeanor. He looked peaceful, like someone who'd made peace with his circumstances. Our eyes met across the street. For a moment, we just looked at each other. the mother and son who'd once been everything to each other and were now complete strangers. Marcus raised his hand in a small wave. Not the desperate gesture of someone seeking contact, but the acknowledgement of someone who knew their place in the world and accepted it. I nodded back. A cool, professional acknowledgement of someone I recognized but had no relationship with. Then Marcus did something that surprised me. He smiled. Not the manipulative smile of someone trying to win me over, but a genuine smile of someone who was genuinely happy to see me doing well. He mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." Then he turned back to his group and continued his conversation. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Marcus had seen me, acknowledged me, expressed pride in my success, and then let me go without trying to approach, without attempting to initiate contact, without making the moment about his needs. For the first time in 10 years, he'd put my comfort over his desire for connection. It was the behavior I'd wanted to see from him all along. The respect for boundaries, the acceptance of consequences, the genuine concern for my welfare over his own needs. And it came exactly 10 years too late to matter. As I walked back to my hotel, I realized that this chance encounter had given me something I hadn't expected: closure. Not because Marcus had proven he'd changed, but because his change was now irrelevant to my life. The woman who'd once desperately wanted her son's love and approval was gone. The woman who'd once believed that family forgiveness was a moral obligation was dead. The woman who'd once thought that love could overcome any betrayal had been replaced by someone much stronger and much smarter. I'd become someone who valued herself enough to reject relationships that came with conditions. Someone who understood that forgiveness without accountability was just enabling. Someone who knew that some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Marcus could spend the rest of his life being the perfect son to other families through his nonprofit work. He could dedicate himself to helping people avoid the mistakes he'd made. He could become a completely different person who deserved forgiveness and second chances. None of it would change the fact that I was no longer someone who needed him in my life. That evening, I was having dinner with a potential business partner when she asked me about family. "Do you have children, Emma?" "No," I said without hesitation. "I don't have children." "Really? I could have sworn I read somewhere that you had a son." I invested many years in raising someone I thought would become my son. But that investment didn't work out the way I'd hoped. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be." That failed investment taught me valuable lessons about putting my energy into relationships that actually provide returns. It's why I'm so selective about who I allow into my inner circle now. That's a very business-like way to think about family. I've learned that the most successful approach to any relationship, business or personal, is to evaluate it based on mutual benefit, respect, and genuine care. If those elements aren't present, it's not a relationship worth maintaining. Later that night, I was reviewing contracts in my hotel suite when I found myself thinking about the encounter with Marcus. Something about his smile, his acceptance, his lack of desperation had been different from every other interaction we'd had in the past 10 years. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered what would have happened if he'd shown that level of maturity and respect 10 years ago. If he'd disagreed with my presence in his life, but expressed it kindly. If he'd asked for space instead of demanding I disappear. If he'd treated me like a human being instead of an embarrassment. But the moment passed quickly. What-ifs were luxury thoughts for people who had regrets. I had none. Marcus had shown me who he was when he thought he had the power to reject me. Everything that came after, his struggles, his growth, his redemption, was just the natural consequence of his choices. I'd built a life so complete, so successful, so satisfying that his presence or absence was equally meaningless to me. That was the ultimate victory. Not needing him to fail for me to succeed, not needing him to suffer for me to be happy, not needing him to acknowledge his mistakes for me to know my worth. I'd moved so far beyond Marcus that he'd become a character in someone else's story, someone I used to know who taught me important lessons about the value of boundaries and self-respect. Tomorrow I would fly back to my empire, my success, my carefully curated life filled with people who'd earned their place in it. Marcus would go back to his nonprofit work, his modest apartment, his daily reminders of what he'd lost when he'd lost me. We would both continue living with the consequences of his choices. The difference was that my consequences were magnificent, and his were exactly what he deserved. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't about punishment. It was about appropriate outcomes. Marcus had chosen to throw away someone who loved him unconditionally. The appropriate outcome was living without that love for the rest of his life. I had chosen to value myself enough to reject someone who didn't value me. The appropriate outcome was building a life so extraordinary that his rejection became irrelevant. We'd both gotten exactly what we'd asked for, and I couldn't be happier with the trade. 15 years after Marcus had called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear, I received the highest honor of my career. I was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos about entrepreneurship and economic empowerment for women over 50. Standing on that stage, addressing world leaders, Fortune 500 CEOs, and global influencers, I reflected on the journey that had brought me there. From a broken woman watching her life burn in a driveway to someone whose opinions shaped international business policy. The greatest myth about success, I told the distinguished audience, is that it requires other people's permission. The greatest truth about success is that it often begins when someone stops giving you permission to dream small. After my speech, I was approached by delegates from dozens of countries, each sharing stories about women in their regions who'd overcome family rejection and societal expectations to build remarkable careers. My story had become more than personal triumph. It had become a global symbol of resilience and self-determination. But the moment that crystallized my complete victory came during the networking reception that evening. "Ms. Johnson," a young woman approached me with obvious nervousness. "I'm Sarah Chun, a business journalist from Bloomberg. I'm working on a story about the economic impact of late-career entrepreneurs, and your company features prominently in my research. I'm happy to help. Actually, I wanted to ask you about something personal, if you don't mind. I've been researching your background, and I came across some old social media posts and newspaper articles that mention you have a son who works in family counseling and nonprofit management." I raised an eyebrow.
Doi.
"Marcus Johnson? He's been quite vocal about his admiration for your success and his regret about past family conflicts. He actually reached out to me when he heard I was writing about you." "Did he?" "He wanted me to know that he's incredibly proud of what you've accomplished and that he takes full responsibility for the estrangement between you. He said he didn't want anyone to think poorly of you because of your family situation." The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, even after 15 years of no contact, Marcus was still trying to manage my narrative, still trying to position himself as someone who had opinions about my life that mattered. "Miss Chun, I think there's been some confusion in your research." "How so?" "I don't have a son. I've never had a son. You may have encountered someone who claims to be related to me, but I can assure you that any such claim is false." Sarah looked confused. "But the records show." "Records can be misleading. What matters is reality. And the reality is that I built my business empire as a single woman with no children and no family obligations. That's actually part of what made my rapid expansion possible. I had no one else's needs to consider." "So Marcus Johnson isn't your son?" "I've never heard of anyone by that name." Sarah was clearly struggling with how to process this information. "But he has the same last name and the timeline matches, and he's been quite public about." "Ms. Chun, let me be very clear. I am a 76-year-old woman who has built a $200 million business empire entirely on my own. I have no children, no family, no personal relationships that compromise my ability to make decisions based purely on business merit. That independence has been crucial to my success. I see. If someone has been claiming to be my son, they're either confused or deliberately misrepresenting their connection to me. Either way, it's not relevant to my business achievements or my message about women's economic empowerment. Should I include this in my article? You should write whatever story serves your readers best. But if you're writing about my business success, I'd suggest focusing on the actual business rather than fictional family relationships. After Sarah left, I felt a satisfaction so complete it was almost overwhelming. I just erased Marcus from my story entirely, denied his very existence to someone who would potentially share that denial with millions of readers. It was the ultimate rejection, not just refusing to reconcile with him, not just declining to forgive him, but refusing to acknowledge that he'd ever existed at all. The next morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. I saw the Bloomberg reporter last night. I understand why you told her you don't have a son. I've been erased from your life so completely that denying my existence is just stating facts. I wanted you to know that I'm not hurt by it, I'm impressed by it. You've become someone who doesn't need to carry the weight of disappointing relationships. I'm proud of who you've become, even if I'm not allowed to be part of it. This is the last time I'll contact you. Marcus. I deleted the message without responding. Later that day, Patricia called with news that would mark the final chapter of my business empire. Emma, I just got off the phone with representatives from the Johnson Foundation, the one started by the tech billionaire. What about them? They want to establish a $50 million grant program for women entrepreneurs over 50, and they want to name it after you. The Emma Johnson Initiative for Women's Economic Empowerment. They want to name a $50 million program after me? They do. And they want you to oversee its implementation. It would essentially make you the face of women's entrepreneurship globally. A $50 million initiative named after me. Global recognition as the leading advocate for women's economic empowerment. My name attached to a program that would help thousands of women build their own business empires. It was everything I dreamed of and more than I'd ever imagined possible. There's one small detail, Patricia continued. They want to do a comprehensive background check and family history as part of their due diligence. Standard procedure for this level of partnership. That's fine. They'll likely uncover information about your son during that process. What son? I don't have a son. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Emma, I've known you for over a decade. I know you had a son who treated you badly and that you cut him off completely. Are you really going to deny his existence? Patricia, 15 years ago, someone I was related to decided he didn't want me in his life. He got his wish. That person no longer exists in my world, and I don't exist in his. When someone erases you from their life completely, the appropriate response is to erase them from yours. But if the Foundation discovers he exists, then they'll discover that I had the strength to cut toxic relationships out of my life completely, even family relationships. That's not a weakness. It's a strength. It shows that I'm someone who values herself enough to reject mistreatment from anyone. You really don't consider him your son anymore? I consider him a stranger who shares some of my DNA and taught me valuable lessons about boundaries and self-respect. Nothing more. The background check took 6 weeks. When the results came back, they included a detailed report on Marcus, his current life circumstances, and his public statements about our estranged relationship. The Foundation's representative called me personally to discuss their findings. Ms. Johnson, we discovered that you do have a biological son who's been quite public about his admiration for your success and his regret about your estrangement. Is that relevant to my qualifications for overseeing your initiative? Well, it raises questions about family dynamics and... Let me stop you there. The fact that I successfully removed a toxic relationship from my life, even a family relationship, demonstrates exactly the kind of strength and boundary setting that makes me qualified to help other women build independent, successful lives. But don't you think? I think that a woman who allows family members to mistreat her because of genetic relationships is someone who hasn't learned her own worth. I think that a woman who cuts off people who demonstrate through their actions that they don't value her is someone who understands what healthy relationships look like. That's a very unconventional approach to family. Conventional approaches to family relationships often keep women trapped in situations where they're expected to accept mistreatment because of biology. I'm living proof that rejecting those expectations can lead to extraordinary success. And you have no regrets about the estrangement? None whatsoever. That estrangement freed me to become who I was meant to be when I wasn't limiting myself to who other people needed me to be. A week later, the foundation announced the launch of the Emma Johnson Initiative for Women's Economic Empowerment. The press release described me as a visionary entrepreneur who embodies the courage to build an independent, successful life on one's own terms. The announcement was covered by major media outlets worldwide. I was interviewed by CNN, BBC, and Forbes about my philosophy on success, independence, and the importance of setting boundaries in all relationships. During one particularly memorable interview, the host asked me directly about family relationships. Ms. Johnson, you've spoken about the importance of choosing relationships that support your success. What would you say to women who feel obligated to maintain family relationships even when those relationships are harmful? I'd say that biology is not a binding contract. DNA doesn't entitle anyone to unlimited access to your energy, your resources, or your emotional well-being. The most successful people I know are selective about who they allow into their inner circle, and that selectivity extends to family members. Some people would call that cold. Some people would call it smart. When you stop accepting mistreatment from people just because you're related to them, you create space in your life for relationships that actually nurture your growth and success. Any final thoughts for women who might be struggling with difficult family relationships?
Yes.
Remember that you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, even if those people are family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to love yourself enough to walk away from people who don't value you. The interview was shared millions of times across social media platforms. #LoveYourselfEnoughToWalkAway became a trending hashtag. Women around the world shared stories of cutting off toxic family members and building better lives as a result. I not only succeeded in business, I'd become a global advocate for women's right to choose their families based on mutual respect rather than genetic obligation. That evening, I was in my penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on how far I'd come when my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Local nonprofit leader dies in car accident." My heart stopped for a moment before I read the article. But it wasn't Marcus. It was someone else entirely, another nonprofit worker who'd been killed in a collision with a drunk driver. I realized as I put the phone down that for just a moment I'd felt nothing. Not relief that it wasn't Marcus, not concern that it might have been, just complete indifference to whether someone I used to know was alive or dead. That's when I understood that my victory was complete. I'd moved so far beyond Marcus that even the possibility of his death generated no emotional response in me whatsoever. He'd become less than a stranger. He'd become irrelevant. The boy who'd called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear had achieved his goal completely. I'd disappeared from his life so thoroughly that he'd disappeared from mine. But while he was living with the consequences of throwing away someone who loved him unconditionally, I was living with the consequences of discovering what I was capable of when I wasn't limiting myself to someone else's expectations. The trade had worked out beautifully for me. And I suspected that Marcus was finally understanding what real bad luck looked like when you created it yourself. 20 years after Marcus had called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear, I received an invitation that would mark the completion of my transformation from victim to global icon. The President of the United States wanted to award me the Presidential Medal of Freedom for my contributions to women's economic empowerment and entrepreneurship. Standing in the East Room of the White House, surrounded by world leaders, Nobel Prize winners, and cultural luminaries, I listened as the president read the citation for my award. Emma Johnson transformed personal rejection into global inspiration. Her journey from discarded family member to business empire builder has empowered millions of women worldwide to value themselves enough to reject relationships that don't serve their highest good. She has proven that the greatest success often comes not from who loves us, but from how completely we love ourselves. As the medal was placed around my neck, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From a broken woman standing in a driveway watching her life burn, to someone the President of the United States was honoring for changing the world. The reception afterward was attended by the most powerful people in America. I was approached by senators who wanted to discuss policy initiatives, by CEOs who wanted to partner with my foundation, by international leaders who wanted to bring my empowerment programs to their countries. But the conversation that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source. "Ms. Johnson?" A young woman approached me nervously. "I'm Jennifer Martinez, and I wanted to thank you personally for changing my life." How did I do that? 3 years ago, I was in an abusive marriage. My husband controlled our finances, isolated me from friends, and convinced me I was worthless without him. But then I saw an interview you gave about the importance of valuing yourself enough to walk away from people who don't value you. And I realized that if a 70-year-old woman could build a business empire after being rejected by her own family, I could certainly leave an abusive husband and rebuild my life. What happened? I left him. I started my own consulting business. I'm now making more money than he ever did, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Your story gave me permission to choose myself over a toxic relationship. Tears filled her eyes. I just wanted you to know that your willingness to share your story, to be honest about cutting off your son, helped me understand that family isn't about biology. It's about respect and mutual support. I'm glad my experience helped you. It did more than help me. It saved me. You showed me that success isn't about getting other people to love you. It's about loving yourself enough to demand better treatment. After Jennifer walked away, I stood there feeling something I'd never experienced before, complete satisfaction with the life I'd built from the ashes of rejection. I'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me, being called bad luck and abandoned by my own son, and transformed it into the foundation for helping millions of women worldwide. Marcus had thought he was throwing away dead weight when he threw me away. Instead, he'd freed a force of nature that had gone on to change the world. Later that evening, I was back in my hotel suite, looking at the Presidential Medal of Freedom in its velvet case, when I received an email that would close the circle on my story forever. The subject line read, "From a grateful stranger." I almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was another fan letter. But something made me open it. "Dear Ms. Johnson, you don't know me, but I know your story. My name is David Chen, and I'm a social worker who has been following your journey for many years. I am writing to inform you that Marcus Johnson passed away peacefully in his sleep last week. I was his counselor for the past 5 years, and he asked me to contact you in the event of his death. I want you to know that Marcus never stopped loving you or regretting what he did to your relationship. But in the years I knew him, he also never expressed any expectation that you would forgive him or take him back into your life. He understood that he had destroyed something irreplaceable, and he spent the last decade of his life trying to help other families avoid making the same mistake he made with you. Marcus died knowing that you had become one of the most successful and respected women in the world. He died knowing that his cruelty had ultimately freed you to become someone extraordinary. And strangely, he seemed to find peace in that knowledge. He asked me to tell you 3 things if this day ever came. First, that he was sorry for calling you bad luck when you were actually the best luck he ever had and was too foolish to recognize it. Second, that he was proud of every success you achieved and grateful that his rejection hadn't destroyed you the way it should have. Third, that he understood why you could never forgive him, and he was grateful that you valued yourself enough to reject someone who had proven he didn't deserve your love. Marcus left no family, no children, no significant relationships. He died as alone as he had made you feel 20 years ago. But he also died knowing that you had thrived in ways he never could, and he found a strange comfort in that justice. I thought you should know that he never tried to use your success to benefit himself, never claimed credit for inspiring your achievements, and never spoke publicly about your relationship except to take full responsibility for its destruction. He truly had become a better person in his final years. But he also understood that becoming better didn't entitle him to forgiveness from the people he'd hurt while learning to be better. I hope this letter brings you some sense of closure, though I suspect you may have found that closure long ago. With respect, David Chen, LCSW. I read the letter 3 times, waiting to feel something. Sadness, relief, regret, vindication, anything. But all I felt was the same indifference I'd felt for years when Marcus's name came up. He'd been dead to me for so long that his actual death changed nothing. The boy who'd called me bad luck had lived to see me receive the highest civilian honor in America. He died knowing that the mother he'd thrown away as worthless had become someone presidents honored and the world celebrated. He died alone, with no family, no legacy, no one to mourn his passing except a social worker who'd been paid to care about him. I'd lived to see myself surrounded by people who'd chosen to love me, who celebrated my successes, who valued my presence in their lives. The contrast was perfect justice. I deleted the email and went to bed, sleeping peacefully with a Presidential Medal of Freedom on my nightstand and the satisfaction of a life built entirely on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up in the same beautiful world I'd created for myself. Marcus's death had changed nothing about my reality, my success, my happiness, or my future. He'd disappeared from my life so completely that even his death was irrelevant to my story. That morning, I had a video conference with leaders from 12 countries who wanted to implement the Emma Johnson initiative in their regions. I had lunch with a Fortune 500 CEO who wanted to partner with my foundation. I had dinner with a group of successful women entrepreneurs who'd become my chosen family. I lived that day the same way I'd lived every day for the past 20 years, as someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't making your enemies suffer, but building a life so magnificent that their opinion of you becomes completely irrelevant. Marcus had called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear. I'd disappeared from his life so completely that I'd become invisible to him while becoming visible to the entire world. He'd thought he was throwing away something worthless. Instead, he'd freed something priceless. The greatest irony of all? If Marcus had supported my dreams instead of crushing them, if he'd valued my potential instead of dismissing it, if he'd chosen love over embarrassment 20 years ago, he could have shared in the empire I built. He could have been the son of Emma Johnson, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, global icon, and living proof that it's never too late to become magnificent. Instead, he died as he'd lived after rejecting me, alone, forgotten, and completely irrelevant to the success story he could have been part of. The moral of my story wasn't about forgiveness or redemption or the healing power of love. The moral of my story was simpler and more powerful. When someone shows you they don't value you, believe them. And then build a life so extraordinary that their loss becomes their punishment and your freedom becomes your victory. Marcus had given me the greatest gift of my life when he'd called me bad luck and ordered me to disappear. He'd given me permission to stop limiting myself to be what he needed me to be and discover what I could become when I was building something entirely for myself. 20 years later, I was proof that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Marcus had wanted me gone, so he could succeed without me. Instead, I'd succeeded beyond his wildest imagination, and he'd failed in ways he'd never recovered from. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't about punishment. It was about appropriate outcomes. And the outcome of our story was exactly what both of us deserved. And that's Emma's incredible journey from heartbreak to triumph, from being called bad luck to becoming a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up giving us the greatest gifts, the motivation to discover who we really are when we stop limiting ourselves to who they need us to be. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe to her true stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss our powerful tales of revenge and redemption. What do you think about Emma's choice to completely cut off her son? Was she too harsh, or did Marcus get exactly what he deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from our community. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's building a life so amazing that their absence becomes irrelevant. Until next time, keep choosing yourself and never let anyone make you feel like you're anything less than magnificent.